The carriage stopped, and I thought there must be some mistake. The house that rose before me was not a house. It was a kingdom, a palace of honey-colored stone that stretched across the Dorset hillside, like something from a painting, its windows blazing gold in the afternoon sun, its gardens rolling out in every direction like a green silk carpet unrolled by God himself. "Ned," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Ned, what is this?" My husband, the man I had married 3 months ago in a village church, the man I had believed was a tenant farmer with mud on his boots and holes in his coat, stood beside me with his hands clasped behind his back and an expression on his face that I could not read. "Welcome home, Your Grace," said a voice. I turned. A line of servants, 40 of them at least, stretched from the front door to the gravel drive, standing at perfect attention, their faces solemn and expectant, and every single one of them was looking at me. "Your Grace." They had called me Your Grace. I looked at Ned. He looked at me. And in his dark brown eyes, warm and steady and impossibly calm, I saw the truth that he had been hiding since the day he knocked on my father's door with mud on his boots and a marriage proposal on his lips. But to understand how a doctor's daughter came to be standing in front of a duke's palace, wearing a mended dress and married to a liar, we must go back. Back to the day my world fell apart and a stranger walked in and offered to carry the pieces. My father was the best doctor in Dorset and the worst businessman in England. Dr. Henry Wren could set a broken bone with the precision of a watchmaker, could diagnose a fever from across the room, could calm a screaming child with nothing more than a gentle voice and a peppermint from his waistcoat pocket. He had delivered half the babies in 3 parishes. He had saved more lives than he could count. He was brilliant and kind and hopelessly, catastrophically terrible with money. I understood this about him by the age of 14 when I found a stack of unpaid invoices hidden behind the medical texts in his study. He treated everyone, rich or poor, gentleman or laborer, and he charged accordingly, which meant that the laborer's wife paid in eggs and the gentleman paid whenever he felt like it, which was almost never. By the time I was 22, the debts had grown into a monster. We owed money to the butcher, the apothecary, the coal merchant, and the bank. Our house, the small stone cottage on the edge of Thornbury village where I had been born, was mortgaged twice over. My father's health was failing, a cough that would not leave, a tremor in his hands that he tried to hide from his patients but could not hide from me. I managed everything. The household, the accounts, the surgery schedule, the delicate art of paying one creditor just enough to keep him quiet while promising another that payment was imminent. I mended our clothes until they were more patched than original fabric. I grew vegetables in the garden. I made soup from bones that a wealthier household would have thrown to the dogs. I did all of this in plain dresses, the color of dishwater, with my auburn hair tied back in a practical knot and my hands chapped red from washing. I was not a beauty. I was not meant to be a beauty. I was meant to be useful. My face was what my father called honest. Wide hazel eyes, a strong jaw, a scattering of freckles across a nose that was slightly too long. I had good teeth and strong arms, and a mind that could add a column of figures faster than any clerk in the county. These were not the qualities that attracted suitors in Regency England. These were the qualities that kept a household from drowning. I had made my peace with the prospect of spinsterhood. I would care for my father. I would manage his practice. I would grow old in this cottage, mending clothes and making soup, and that would be enough. And then Sir Giles Pratt came to call. Sir Giles Pratt was the kind of man that other men called a good fellow and women called nothing at all, because women knew better. He was 52, florid-faced, with a belly that preceded him into every room and small wet eyes that lingered on things they should not linger on. He owned 3 estates, 200 tenants, and the mortgage on our cottage. He was, by any measurable standard, powerful. He arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in a carriage that cost more than our house. I watched from the surgery window as he heaved himself down the step, adjusted his waistcoat over his belly, and examined our front door with the satisfied expression of a man surveying something he intended to purchase. My father received him in the parlor. I was not invited to join them. I pressed my ear to the door instead. "The matter is simple, Wren," Sir Giles said, in the tone of a man explaining arithmetic to a child. "You owe me £412. The bank holds a further 300 against the cottage. Your income, such as it is, does not cover the interest, let alone the principal. Within 6 months, you will be in debtor's prison, and your daughter will be on the parish." A silence. I heard my father's chair creak. "However," Sir Giles continued, "I'm a reasonable man. A generous man. I am prepared to forgive the entire debt, settle the mortgage, and provide you with a comfortable annuity for the remainder of your life. In exchange for what? My father asked. His voice was thin and tired. Your daughter? Margaret, as my wife. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white, my stomach turning. She is young, healthy, and by all accounts sensible. Sir Giles continued, as if he were describing a horse at auction. She will make a suitable mistress for Pratt Hall. I require an heir. She will provide one. It is a fair exchange. My father said nothing for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. I cannot sell my daughter, Giles. You are not selling her. You are securing her future and your own. Consider the alternative, Henry. Debtor's prison is not kind to men in your condition. After Sir Giles left, I found my father sitting alone in the parlor, staring at the empty fireplace. He looked 10 years older than he had that morning. I heard, I said, sitting beside him. I will not do it, Maggie. I will not trade you like merchandise. I took his hand. His fingers were cold and trembling. How long do we have? He gave me a fortnight to decide. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, doing the mathematics of despair. £412 to Pratt, 300 to the bank. Perhaps 100 more scattered across a dozen smaller creditors. £800 total, an impossible sum. A sum that would take me 20 years to earn, by which time my father would be dead and the cottage would be rubble. I could marry Sir Giles Pratt. I could save my father. I could trade my body, my future, my entire self for the price of £800 and a comfortable annuity. Or I could watch my father go to prison and die there. I was preparing to say yes. God help me, I was preparing to say yes. And then on the morning of the 12th day, someone knocked on the door. He was standing on our doorstep in the rain, wearing a coat that had seen better decades and boots caked with mud. He was tall, taller than any farmer I had ever met, with broad shoulders, dark brown hair that curled damply at his collar, and eyes the color of warm earth after rain. His face was tanned and angular, with a strong jaw and a nose that looked like it had been broken at least once. He was, I noticed, despite myself, unfairly handsome. The kind of handsome that had no business being attached to a man in a patched coat, standing in the rain outside a bankrupt doctor's cottage. "Dr. Wren?" he asked. His voice was deep and unhurried, with an accent I could not quite place, not local, not London, something in between. "My father is resting," I said. "I am his daughter. Can I help you?" He looked at me. Not the way Sir Giles looked at me, with that assessing, proprietary gaze. This man looked at me the way you look at a landscape you have been searching for and have only just found. It was a look of quiet recognition, as if he already knew me and was simply confirming what he had suspected. "My name is Ned," he said. "Ned Ashford. I'm a tenant farmer recently arrived in the county. I heard that Dr. Wren is in some difficulty." "You heard correctly," I said. "Too tired for pretense. What of it?" "I would like to help." I almost laughed. "Help, you are a farmer, in a patched coat." "No offense, Mr. Ashford, but I do not think you are in a position to help." Something flickered in his dark eyes. Amusement? Or something else? "I have some savings," he said carefully. "Enough, perhaps, to settle the most pressing debts, but I would not offer charity. I am not a charitable man." "Then what are you offering?" He held my gaze. "A proposal. Of marriage." I stared at him. The rain dripped from the eaves. "Somewhere in the house." My father coughed. "You do not know me," I said. "No, but I know your reputation. The entire county knows that Margaret Wren is the most capable, most intelligent, most practical woman in Dorset. I need a wife. I need a partner. Someone who can manage a household, keep accounts, and speak her mind without flinching. And in return? In return, I will pay your father's debts, all of them, and he will live with us where you can care for him properly." I examined this man, this Ned Ashford, with the critical eye I had learned from years of assessing fabric quality and butcher's prices and patients' symptoms. His coat was patched, yes, but the stitching was excellent, too excellent for a farmer's wife. His boots were muddy, but the leather beneath the mud was fine quality. His hands were large and capable, but they were not the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime gripping a plow. They were too smooth, the nails too clean. Something did not add up. But standing in that doorway with my father coughing behind me and Sir Giles Pratt's deadline looming like a guillotine, I did not have the luxury of solving puzzles. I had the luxury of choosing between two strangers, one who made my skin crawl, and one who looked at me as if I were worth something. I accept, I said, but I have conditions. His eyebrows rose. Conditions? My father lives with us. I manage the household finances. And you will never, ever tell me what I am worth. I already know. He smiled. It was the first time I had seen him smile, and it changed his face entirely. The severity softened, the broken nose became roguish rather than threatening. The warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners with what I would later recognize as delight. "Miss Wren," he said, "I believe we have an accord." We were married 5 days later in the parish church. I wore my best dress, which was still my worst dress by any objective standard, a faded blue cotton with a mended collar. Ned wore a clean shirt and a coat that was marginally less patched than the one he had arrived in. My father gave me away. His hands trembled on my arm, but his eyes were clear and grateful. Sir Giles Pratt, informed that the debt had been settled in full by an anonymous benefactor, had departed in a fury that I was told could be heard 3 fields away. The cottage Ned took me to was small, a stone and thatch farmhouse on 30 acres of good Dorset soil, with a kitchen garden, a stable, 3 chickens, and a view of rolling hills that went on forever. It was modest, it was clean. It was, I thought, exactly what a tenant farmer's home should be. And yet, there were things that did not fit. Small things. A shelf of books in the sitting room that included Virgil in the original Latin and a first edition of Adam Smith. A writing desk of polished mahogany that would have cost more than the cottage itself. A set of silver-backed brushes in the bedroom that bore no initials but were clearly custom-made. "Where did you get these books?" I asked on our second evening, running my finger along the spines. "Inherited," he said, without looking up from the fire. "From whom? An uncle, eccentric fellow?" "Read too much." "And the desk?" "Also the uncle. Must have been quite an uncle." He was. He met my eyes then, and I saw it again, that flicker of something, amusement or wariness or both, before he smoothed it away. "Would you like some tea?" I let it go, not because I believed him, but because the alternative was too strange to contemplate. What possible reason would a genuine duke or lord or anyone of consequence have for disguising himself as a farmer and marrying a bankrupt doctor's daughter? None. Obviously none. I was being fanciful. So I settled into the life of a farmer's wife, and to my surprise, I loved it. I loved the routine. The early mornings, the cold air sharp as glass, the smell of bread baking and earth turning. I loved the work, the simple, honest labor of keeping a household running, the satisfaction of a clean floor and a full pantry. I loved the chickens, ridiculous, quarrelsome creatures who laid precisely when they felt like it, and not a moment sooner. And gradually, reluctantly, against every defense I had built, I loved Ned. He was nothing like what I had expected. He worked hard, rising before dawn, spending hours in the fields, coming home with dirt on his hands and tiredness in his shoulders. But he did not work like a farmer. He worked like a man performing a role, competently, willingly, but with an awareness that this was not quite his natural state. He read in the evenings, by firelight, with the focused attention of a man accustomed to study. He discussed politics with a sophistication that no tenant farmer should possess. He knew the price of wheat in London markets and the name of the Foreign Secretary and the latest debates in Parliament, and sometimes late at night, when he thought I was asleep, I heard him writing. The scratch of pen on paper, hour after hour, in a hand that was too fluid and too practiced for a simple farmer's correspondence. I said nothing. I watched. I waited. I was falling in love with a man I did not fully understand, and the uncertainty was both thrilling and terrifying. 3 months into our marriage, the cracks in Ned's disguise became fissures. The first was the horse, a magnificent bay stallion delivered one morning by a groom I had never seen, who addressed Ned as Sir with a deference that made my eyebrows rise. Ned explained that he had purchased it cheaply from a traveling horse dealer. The horse, I noted, had shoes bearing the mark of the finest farrier in London. The second was the letter. I found it on his desk one afternoon when he was in the fields. The seal was broken, but the wax was deep crimson, stamped with a crest I did not recognize, a rampant lion holding a sword. The letter itself was addressed to E.A. and signed by someone named Bramley. It contained a single line, "All is prepared as you instructed. Your Grace, your Grace." I put the letter back exactly where I had found it. My hands were shaking. The third was the visitor. A well-dressed man in a black carriage appeared at our gate one morning. asked to speak with Mr. Ashford, and spent 20 minutes in the barn in urgent whispered conversation. When he left, Ned's face was tight with worry. "Who was that?" I asked. "A creditor. Old business. Nothing to concern yourself with." It was the first time he had directly lied to me, and we both knew it. That night, I lay beside my sleeping husband and stared at the ceiling, just as I had stared at another ceiling months ago when I was deciding whether to marry Sir Giles Pratt. But this time, the mathematics were different. This time, the equation was not about debt and survival, it was about trust. Who was Ned Ashford? What was he hiding? And why? I decided to wait. He would tell me, or I would find out. Either way, the truth was coming. I could feel it approaching, like a storm gathering on the far horizon, still distant, still silent, but unmistakably there. We will take a very short break. If you do not want to miss new stories, please subscribe to the channel and tap the bell icon. Now, let us continue because the storm has arrived. It came on a Thursday morning, exactly 3 months and 9 days after our wedding. I was in the kitchen garden, pulling carrots, my hands deep in the cool earth, when I heard the sound of hooves on the lane. Not one horse, several, and the distinctive creak and rattle of a large carriage, the kind that cost more than our cottage. I stood up, wiping my hands on my apron, and watched as a gleaming black carriage drawn by 4 matched gray horses swept up to our gate. Behind it came a second carriage, smaller, and behind that 2 riders in livery. The door of the first carriage opened. A woman stepped out, a handsome, dignified woman of about 50, wearing a dark blue traveling dress and a bonnet that had never seen the inside of a village shop. She looked at our cottage, looked at the chickens, looked at me standing in the garden with dirt on my hands and carrots in my apron, and her face arranged itself into an expression of barely contained distress. "Oh dear," she said. "Oh, Your Grace, what has he done to you? Your Grace." There it was again. Ned appeared from the barn. When he saw the carriage, he stopped. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, resignation, and something that looked remarkably like guilt. "Mrs. Bramley," he said, "you are early." "I'm precisely on time, Your Grace," the woman said crisply. "You said 3 months. It has been 3 months. The estate cannot be managed by letter any longer. The steward is threatening to resign, the tenants are asking questions, and Lady Hartwell," she glanced at me, "deserves to know the truth. Lady Hartwell." I set down the carrots very carefully. I untied my apron. I folded it with the precise, controlled movements of a woman who is holding herself together through sheer force of habit. "Ned," I said. My voice was quiet. "Who are you?" He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the mask was gone. The performance of the simple farmer, the easy manner, the rough speech, all of it fell away, and standing before me was a different man. The same face, the same warm brown eyes, but held differently with an authority, a bearing, a quiet command that I had glimpsed 100 times and refused to see. "My name is Edward Ashford," he said, "the 7th Duke of Hartwell. Hartwell Manor is 17 miles north of here. It has been in my family for 200 years. The ground did not open beneath my feet, the sky did not fall, the chickens continued their ridiculous squabbling by the fence. The world carried on exactly as it had been, except that every single thing I thought I knew about my life had just been set on fire." "You lied to me," I said. "Yes, every day for 3 months. You lied to me every single day." "Yes." "Why?" He ran his hand through his hair. That gesture I knew so well, and for the first time it looked like what it had always been, the gesture of a man raised in drawing rooms, not farmyards. "Because I needed to know," he said. "I needed to know that someone could love me. Not the title, not the estate, not the fortune. Me, Edward, the man. So you tested me, like a horse at market, to see if I would perform. No," he stepped toward me. "Maggie, no, it was never a test. It was a hope. A desperate, selfish, probably unforgivable hope that somewhere in this world there existed a woman who would choose a poor farmer over a rich predator, who would build a life from nothing because the man beside her was kind, not because he was powerful. And if I had failed your test, if I had been mercenary and shallow, would you have walked away?" "I could not have walked away from you if I tried," he said. "I knew that within the first hour, when you told me you had conditions, when you said you already knew what you were worth." Tears were burning my eyes, but I would not let them fall. "Not yet. You had no right." "No. I had no right. I married a farmer. I fell in love with a farmer. I do not know who this Duke is. He is the same man, Maggie. The same man who reads by the fire and argues about the price of wheat and cannot fry an egg to save his life. The title does not change who I am. It changes who I am. I am not a duchess. I am a doctor's daughter in a mended dress who can pull carrots and keep accounts. I do not know how to be a duchess. He looked at me, and despite everything, despite the rage and the betrayal and the ground shifting under my feet, his eyes were so full of love that it physically hurt. You already are one, he said. You have been one since the moment you opened that door and told a stranger you already knew your own worth. I cried then. I stood in the kitchen garden, surrounded by carrots and chickens and the ruins of my understanding of the world, and I wept. He did not touch me. He did not try to comfort me. He stood there and let me feel every single thing I needed to feel. And he did not look away. When I was finished, I wiped my face with my dirty apron and said, "Show me the house." Hartwell Manor was everything our cottage was not. It was vast, golden, and impossibly beautiful. Honey-colored stone glowed in the afternoon light. The gardens were a masterwork of English landscaping. Rolling lawns, ancient oaks, a lake that shimmered like hammered silver. The house itself had 60 rooms, a ballroom, a library that made me gasp, a kitchen that could feed an army. Mrs. Bramley walked me through it like a general conducting a tour of a conquered territory. She was the head housekeeper, had been for 30 years, and she loved this house the way a captain loves a ship. "The staff number's 42, she said, leading me through a corridor lined with portraits of Ashford ancestors. The estate covers 3,000 acres. The annual income, well managed, exceeds £12,000. I stopped walking. £12,000? Per annum, Your Grace. I had spent my entire adult life fighting over £800. 12,000 per annum. The number was so large, it was almost meaningless. Why? I asked Mrs. Bramley, turning to face her. Did he do this? Truly? She considered me with those sharp, kind eyes because His Grace watched 3 women try to marry him for his fortune. The first wanted the London house, the second wanted the jewels, the third wanted the title for her family's social advancement. None of them ever asked his name. His name? His Christian name, Edward. Not one of them ever called him Edward. They called him Your Grace, or Hartwell, or my Lord. He was a purse to them, not a person. I thought of Ned, my Ned, reading by the fire, his stockinged feet propped on the hearth, laughing at my jokes about the chickens. I thought of the way he said my name, Maggie, with a warmth that made it sound like music. I call him Ned, I said. Mrs. Bramley's severe face softened into something very close to a smile. Yes, Your Grace.
I know, Edward.
I was learning to call him Edward, had planned to introduce me to society gradually. A quiet dinner here. A country gathering there. A slow, careful immersion into a world I had never been designed to inhabit. Sir Giles Pratt ruined that plan. Word had spread, as word always does, that the Duke of Hartwell had married in secret, and that his bride was not a lady of quality but a doctor's daughter from a Dorset village. The ton was scandalized, the gossips were delighted, and Sir Giles, still smarting from the humiliation of losing me to a farmer, saw an opportunity for revenge. He began a campaign, whispers at clubs, letters to society hostesses, careful, poison-tipped innuendos about my character, my origins, my suitability. By the time Edward and I arrived in London for the season, the drawing rooms of Mayfair were buzzing with a single question: who is this woman, and how dare she call herself a duchess? The Hartwell ball was Edward's answer. It was held on the first Saturday of May, in the London townhouse, a magnificent white stone mansion on Berkeley Square. 300 guests, the finest champagne, an orchestra that could have played for the king. Edward had spared no expense, because Edward, I was learning, did nothing by halves. I wore a gown of deep rose silk, the color of sunset, with pearls at my throat that had belonged to Edward's mother. My hair was styled by a woman whose fingers moved like a musician's. I looked in the mirror and saw for the first time a duchess. Not a costume, not a performance. A woman who had earned the right to stand in any room and be counted. The ballroom was a sea of silk and candlelight. I stood at the entrance beside Edward, his hand warm and steady on the small of my back, and watched 300 of England's wealthiest, most powerful people turn to look at me. Some looked with curiosity, some with admiration. Some with the barely concealed disdain of people who believed that birth was destiny and that a doctor's daughter had no business standing where I stood. Sir Giles Pratt was among them. He waited until the dancing had begun, until the champagne had loosened tongues, until the room was relaxed and receptive. Then he approached. "Your Grace?" he said to Edward, his small wet eyes sliding to me with a smile that made my skin prickle. "And Mrs. Ashford? Or should I say, the former Miss Wren? The carrot-pulling Duchess?" A circle of silence formed around us. People stopped dancing. Ears sharpened. The tongue smelled blood. "I was just telling Lady Pemberton," Sir Giles continued, his voice carrying, "about your charming courtship. How you dressed as a farmer. How you deceived this poor girl into marriage. One might almost call it fraud, if one were unkind." "One might," Edward said, his voice perfectly level, "if one were Sir Giles Pratt and had attempted to purchase a woman like livestock to settle a debt." The silence deepened. Pratt's smile flickered. "I have the receipts, Sir Giles," Edward continued, stepping forward. "I have your original contract, offering to buy Margaret Wren in exchange for her father's debts. I have testimony from 3 of your tenants describing how you adjusted their rents to fund your London lifestyle. And I have a letter from your former estate manager detailing how you evicted a family of 5 in winter because the mother refused your advances." Each word landed like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread through the room. Sir Giles opened his mouth. Nothing came out. I stepped forward. My heart was hammering, but my voice was clear. "Sir Giles," I said, "you called me worthless. You tried to buy me like fabric at a market. You came here tonight to humiliate me." I looked him dead in the eye. "But I am standing in a ballroom wearing pearls that belong to a duchess. I am married to a man who walked away from all of this." I gestured at the glittering room to find someone who saw him as a person, not a purse. "And you're standing in my house wearing a stain on your reputation that no amount of money will ever wash out." I leaned in, just slightly, just enough for him to hear me clearly. "I am the carrot-pulling Duchess, and you are leaving." The room erupted, not in anger, but in something far more devastating: laughter. The bright, uncontrollable laughter of 300 people who had just watched a bully be dismantled by a woman half his size. Sir Giles Pratt left the ball. He left London the following morning. He left England by the end of the month. The last I heard, he was living in a rented villa in Italy, complaining to anyone who would listen about the decline of English society. I did not spare him another thought. The autumn of 1820 came to Hartwell Manor like a benediction. The trees in the park had turned to burnished copper and gold. The lake reflected a sky so blue it looked painted. The gardens, which I had expanded with a kitchen plot that would have made any farmer proud, were heavy with the last harvest of the season. Carrots, naturally. One must never forget where one comes from. My father lived in the dower cottage at the edge of the estate, a charming stone house with a garden and a view of the hills. His health had improved remarkably since leaving the damp, cramped cottage in Thornbury. He had patients again, the estate workers and their families, and he treated them with the same gentle skill he had always possessed, charging them nothing, because now he could afford not to. Mrs. Bramley ran the household with military precision and a warmth that belied her stern exterior. She had taken to calling me Your Grace with an inflection that sounded suspiciously like affection. Edward had given up farming. He admitted freely, a terrible farmer. But he was an excellent duke, attentive to his tenants, careful with the estate's finances, and possessed of a quiet, steady leadership that reminded me of my father at his best. I sat in the library one evening in the chair by the fire that had become mine, a book open on my lap and a cup of tea growing cold beside me. I was not reading. I was thinking. My hand rested on the gentle swell of my stomach, where a new life was growing, small and secret and fierce. Edward came in from the fields, smelling of autumn and earth, and stopped in the doorway when he saw me. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Names," I said. "If it is a girl, I would like to call her Hope. And if it is a boy, Henry, after my father." He crossed the room and knelt beside my chair. He took my hand and pressed it to his lips. His dark eyes, those warm, steady, impossibly honest eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me from a stranger's face on a rainy doorstep, held mine with a tenderness that took my breath away. "Maggie," he said, "thank you." "For what?" "For choosing the farmer." I ran my fingers through his hair, that dark, curling hair that no amount of pomade would ever tame, and smiled. The farmer had better boots than he deserved. "I should have known," he laughed. That real laugh, the one that crinkled his eyes and filled the room and made the fire seem warmer. Outside, the sun was setting over Hartwell. The honey-colored stone glowed like amber. The gardens stretched into the golden distance. Somewhere in the kitchen, Mrs. Bramley was giving orders that could be heard from 3 rooms away. Somewhere in the dower cottage, my father was reading by the fire, content and safe. And here in this library, in this house that I had never expected and did not entirely deserve, but had learned to call my own. I sat with my husband's hand in mine, and our child growing beneath my heart, and thought, this is what it means to be home. Not a place, not a title, not a fortune, a person who sees you, truly sees you, and chooses to stay. Thank you for listening to this story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from, and what this story made you feel. Was it the moment she discovered the truth? Was it when she said, I'm the carrot-pulling Duchess? Or was it the quiet moment by the fire? Tell us in the comments, and if you want more stories of love, deception, and redemption, hit that subscribe button and the bell. We release new stories every single day. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest treasure is hiding in a patched coat.